Hello and welcome back to Curmudgeon Media. My name's Tom and Amphibia is back. It's perfect timing since the Owl House has gone on hiatus and tagged in Amphibia to keep the existential dread at bay. After all, we all require a drip feed of cartoons to fill the void in our empty souls. In either case, Amphibia is a great show and we're here to talk about it. And by we, I mean myself and friend of the channel and fellow YouTuber, OmgItsKavi.
What's up everybody, Kavi here, teaming up with Tom to give you some thoughts on some frogs.
If you haven't seen Amphibia, don't worry about it. This is going to be a spoiler-free video, so hopefully y'all will enjoy it regardless of whether you've seen the show or not.
If you're unfamiliar, Amphibia follows the adventures of Anne Boonchoy, a human girl who finds herself lost in a world of anthropomorphic amphibians through mysterious circumstances.
She befriends a family of frog folk, Pop Pop, Polly and Sprig, and settles into the town of Wartwood. With their help, she tries to figure out a way to get back home with an emphasis on wacky episodic misadventures along the way. What makes Amphibia stand out in an oversaturated animation market is its humour. The show is honestly really funny, and its comedy is one of its greatest hooks as a series.
Now let's go rob an old man!
With a unique blend of meta humor.
It's just that Hop Pop delivered the perfect sitcom catchphrase.
Must be painful to make so little sense all the time.
Sharp wit.
Aren't these old detective films the greatest? It's like a normal movie, but no one talks out loud and everybody loses in the end.
And absolute absurdity. It hits all the right notes, especially within the landscape of millennial humor. And that, folks, is what we're going to be talking about today.
So sit back, grab yourself a beverage of your choice, and let's talk about how Amphibia is a lesson in comedy. In this video, we're not just going to be talking about why Amphibia is funny. By breaking down its distinctive humour in detail, we'll also be learning about the art and structure of the gag. So let me ask you, what makes something humorous? Where does that emotion come from?
These are difficult questions to address because trying to analyze humor is an exercise in futility. As E.B. White claimed, humor can be dissected, as a frog can, pun unintended, but the thing dies in the process, and the innards are discouraging to any but the purely scientific mind. And this, ironically, is a statement which is quite hard to read with a straight face. So we'll dive into it, but we won't get too deep.
It took us 11 minutes and a dictionary to get your joke, but good job.
As it stands, there are three predominant theories of humour: the superiority theory, the relief theory, and the incongruity theory. The superiority theory claims that the thing we find funny is inferior in some way, and humour comes from our sense of superiority over that thing. You know, laughing at someone's misfortune, schadenfreude, that kind of thing. The relief theory claims that laughter is the release of built-up tension. Yeah, these two theories are generally viewed as not great. They're both way too specific to explain something as broad and subjective as humour. This leaves us with the incongruity theory, which has a lot more credibility and is broad enough that it can be applied to multiple kinds of gag. The incongruity theory simply suggests that humour comes from juxtaposition, or incongruity, clues in the name. Incongruity is something unexpected, out of context, inappropriate, unreasonable, illogical, exaggerated, and so forth. This could mean subverting our expectations by juxtaposing those expectations against reality, or in terms that actually make sense, the element of surprise.
We'll be coming back to that, but it could also mean juxtaposing two contradictory tones. For example, black humor generally works by presenting dark subject matter in an unserious way. That's contradictory. Also, the examples we'll be going through by no means captures everything about Amphibia's comedy. We're just gonna go through a couple notable examples that are fun to talk about.
Humour is a broad, complex topic, and at the end of the day, we're just here to highlight some fun moments and talk about what makes them work. So with that in mind, let's take a look at an example and see what we can pry from it, shall we?
Absolutely not. I was in a school play once. It was awful. And this place is bringing back memories. I'm a truth, that's a truth.
I peed a little. In the spirit of dissecting this frog, we're going to break the joke down into three core aspects: its pacing, its element of surprise, and absurdism.
Let's start with pacing, or how a joke is timed. It's one of the hardest things to talk about in comedy, and one of the most important. People often talk about how timing is everything, yet it remains something of a mystery. It's something that's simultaneously very precise and also totally down to interpretation.
So much hearsay is slung around about pacing. timing is knowing when to stop talking, taking a pause before you deliver the punchline, and so on. But all these quotes talk about pauses, a gap. But what about this? This kind of comedy isn't defined by gaps, it's defined by its breakneck pace. And the same can be said of a lot of Amphibia's humour, where it's shooting off 100 jokes a minute in some cases. Even the "I'm a tooth" gag is framed by a second punchline.
4 to 5 dentists agree, I was traumatized.
And this.
Anyways, see you dudes later. I've got a complicated jigsaw puzzle with my name on it. Yes, my babies, yes.
This is the kind of humour that's ideal for those no-context compilation videos.
All these quotes we just read make it seem like fast-paced comedy is detrimental to humor, which is total nonsense. Amphibia can show us why, and it has all to do with that idea of incongruity. In this case, the incongruity is a sudden juxtaposition of two different kinds of pacing. It's moving from 0 to 60 miles per hour in a split second. With this sequence, we open with a slow to medium pacing. The point of view is fixed, and there's minimal movement within the frame. Anne hops lazily across the stage while the other kids bob up and down in place in the background. You've got a jaunty little piano tune, and then Anne falls over, and before you even have time to process that fact, everything is literally on fire. Minimal movement in the frame has turned into frantic, chaotic movement. The pacing at the beginning contrasts the pacing at the end.
But why is this incongruity funny? If you were to ask me, I'd say it's a matter of sudden overstimulation. Like, not only does the pacing shift so quickly, but there are several little punchlines that stack upon each other in rapid succession. Anne faceplants the stage, and before you can blink, the stage lamps have plummeted from the ceiling, and then the back of the stage spontaneously combusts, and then the other kids are careering around in a blind panic as a hellish inferno engulfs the frame. The whole gag sucker punches you with ridiculous exaggeration. The best way I could describe it is, the joke blindsides you and you're left in a state of utter disbelief, and that's where the humour comes from. In fact, I'd almost be tempted to describe the laughter as a kind of nervous reaction.
I don't feel safe.
This same idea can also be applied to our second order of business, the element of surprise. I mean, the sudden shift in pacing is one thing, but what about our shift in perspective in this scene?
Oh, hang on, we got a quote for this. Let's see. Aha! In these cases, the image is given to the audience under one interpretation, which is subverted with the addition of subsequent information. The initial image is subsequently shown to be radically underdetermined. This is basically a stuffy way of saying that the element of surprise works like this. We're led to interpret the scene in one way before the rug is pulled out from under our feet. This is easily the most popular form of incongruity in comedy, and is the bedrock of classics like Airplane.
And that, as much as anything else, led to my drinking problem.
So back to our example. We're given the setup as most gags do.
I was in a school play once. It was awful.
So when we transition into the flashbacks, we're expecting Anne to embarrass herself on stage in some way. She's dressed in a cumbersome tooth costume, and there's a comically oversized toothbrush. So when she goes careering into the prop toothbrush, the gag plays out exactly as we expect, except that it doesn't, you fucking moron. Everything goes to shit.
The gag completely undermines our expectations by elevating the disaster to ridiculous proportions that are completely impossible to predict. It makes us, the viewer, the butt of the joke, because it leads us on with visual information that our brains try to rationalize, then throws that all out the window with a bunch of nonsense right out of left field.
And the brilliance of this reversal is that it works in tandem with the sudden breakneck pacing. The sudden descent into chaos happens quicker than we can process the original expected gag. It all layers on top of itself like a delicious comedy trifle. But what's the difference between this and this?
And that, as much as anything else, led to my drinking problem.
In the latter's case, the surprise sort of makes perfect sense. It hinges on how we interpret the phrase drinking problem. We expect it to mean alcoholism, but in this case it literally means they have trouble physically drinking. It's surprising, but it's a clever pivot on a common saying, so it's still completely within the ballpark of logic, even if it is ridiculous. But this is just absurd.
So what is absurdism? Well, if the element of surprise undermines our initial interpretation of a gag, absurdism breaks it completely and beyond repair. Although used sparingly, it leads to some of the most memorable gags in the show. On the topic of this kind of humor, Journalist Rachel Aroesti says that there is rarely room for the traditional setup punchline structure. Instead, things are funny because they are willfully jarring and strange. That, dear viewer, is absurdism, and it's one of the best parts of Amphibia.
If surprise is the incongruity of interpretation and subversion, of the expected and the unexpected, then absurdity is the ultimate version of this. I mean, what is this play even about? It's a ridiculous, absurd subversion of anything we could possibly expect. And we get smatterings of this bizarreness throughout the show. But there's one scene that I think epitomizes this idea better than any other scene in the entire show. So, Season 2 sees the introduction of another human deuteragonist, Marcy Wu, friend of Anne's, neurodivergent icon, roleplay enthusiast, rogue, etc. When Anne introduces Marcy to the townsfolk of Wartwood, they're pretty slow to accept. In an attempt to curry favour with the locals, she sets about improving their town. Unfortunately, her well-meaning attitude is quickly exploited by the corrupt mayor, who uses Marcy to transform Wartwood into a tourist trap, replete with costumed mascots and that thing.
Not loving that clock.
Naturally, everything goes horribly wrong. Hijinks ensue, yada yada, you get the picture, and in the end, this happens.
Who the heck is even in there? Bugs! It's just bugs!
It's just like the last example, our expectations here aren't just being subverted, they're completely broken. The juxtaposition of expectation and reality is exaggerated to the point of absurdity. Like, you'd be forgiven for at least assuming that whoever is underneath that mascot costume is at least a character we've seen, or if nothing else, some inhabitant of Wartwood. But no, it's just bugs.
It's just bugs!
But I do think there's another angle to this. Joseph Pelling, creator of the popular absurdist dark comedy web series Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which I'll just say is one of my personal favorites, had this to say about his creation. Some people might find it funny, and some people might find it genuinely disturbing. I can't tell where the line is. Yeah, me neither, Joseph. Me neither.
In either case, this reveals another angle that sometimes applies to certain cases of absurd humour, something beyond just expectation and subversion, an incongruity that happens in our own brain where we aren't even sure if we're meant to be laughing or not, and I personally find that hysterical. Bit of a paradox, huh?
Well, this was an informative dissection, I think. Thank you for watching. If you want more jokes explained to you, check out the companion video over on my channel. And while you're at it, why don't you subscribe? Oh, but subscribe to the Curmudgeon Media channel first, since you're already here. You might as well sub to both channels, it's free anyway.
But what about you guys? Are there any moments in Amphibia that you think are particularly funny? Comment below, let us know. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and be sure to subscribe for more. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.